Good afternoon and welcome to A Sheep Speaks. I'm going to be reading my third chapter of the book A Sheep Speaks, which is part of my testimony. And if you remember from last week, we were in chapter 2, and I had looked up and seen the police car lights in my face. And so that was the first thing that happened to me. That was the last thing that happened to me in chapter 2. And now we're in chapter 3, which is entitled Miracles, Past and Present. And it says, as I started pulling over, I thought to myself, great, what are we going to do now? Of course, at 15, I didn't have a driver's license or an ID. Sure enough, the police pulled us over and asked us girls to get into one of the police cars, and Ricky was taken into a separate unit. And as soon as we were on our way to the Ozona police station. Ozona is about 400 miles west of Houston, so our trip to California abruptly ended in the Texas Hill Country. The officers took all three of us girls into a room for questioning. They started going through all our personal items as they questioned us. It was very embarrassing as they pulled out one item after another out of our makeshift luggage. Then they told us to call our parents and tell them where we were and what we had done. My oldest sister got on the phone and started chastising me for worrying my mother. I very quickly reminded her that she was not my mother, but that she was just my sister, and she wasn't in control of me, so she couldn't tell me what to do. So you see, obviously, I wasn't very remorseful. After the police were through interrogating us, they put us in a cell. I remember I wasn't afraid of the police or of getting in trouble, but I was scared to death they were going to turn off the lights because I was afraid of the dark. You would have thought this would have humbled us or at least subdued us for a little bit, but it didn't. Becky and I were hungry, and we hadn't had anything to eat that day, and there were some tin cups in the cell. So the inmates could have a drink of water. I assume that's what they were for. So the next thing Becky and I decided to do was take our tin cups and run them back and forth across the steel bars to get their attention and let them know that we were hungry. At the same time, we thought it would be funny to sing that song, I want to go home, I want to go home. Oh, Lord, how I want to go home. So we thought this was a big joke, obviously. And amidst the noise that we were making and our tin cups and our singing, some of the jailers finally came back to see what was going on. We were causing quite a ruckus. So then, when they came back to find out what the problem was, we told them we were hungry. Would you believe they asked us what we wanted and if sandwiches would be okay? We were like, sure. So even though it wasn't lunchtime or supper time, we were fed some chicken salad sandwiches. It was almost like room service. I'm sure this was because we were in a small town that was not used to the likes of us. Kathy's parents came to pick her up, and Becky's dad agreed to pick me up at the same time that he picked Becky up. And then he brought me home. I found out later that my mom had filed a missing persons report on me. I'm sure she was worried to death, but when you're 15, you don't think about others. At least I didn't. I only cared about having fun, no matter the cost to other people. So we made it home the following day, and the next Friday night, I had already talked my mother into allowing me to go out to the movie theater where we all hung out. And so the next thing that we knew, two police officers in a cruiser were pulling up to us as we sat on a bench outside the movie theater. One of the officers had evidently recognized me from the description of the missing persons report. He called me over to the car and asked me for my name. And sure enough, it was me. I was the missing person. He didn't seem very pleased that my mother had already let me go out and about after I had just gotten home from jail just 3 or 4 days earlier. So not having received any consequences for my bad behavior, I just went on with my business as usual. Fast forward a few years, and not much had changed, except I was older now. I still didn't have a driver's license or a car, but what I did have was a good friend who was a doorman at one of the popular clubs in Houston. That name of that club was the Palace. That meant I could get in at 16 with no ID without any problem, and so could my friend Sharon. So I'm not sure how we managed to get a ride to the club, but I do know Sharon and I did not have a ride home. This was common occurrence with us. We could always talk someone into taking us home. This particular night, however, we were finding it difficult to get a ride. One black guy that Sharon had been playing pool with said that he would give us a ride, but when he found out she lived in East Houston and I lived in Pasadena, he said he would not drive to Pasadena alone and drop me off last, because Pasadena had a bad reputation of having lots of KKK clans there in Pasadena. Remember, this was in the 1970s. And actually, the regional headquarters for the KKK was on Red Bluff Road, right where you enter Pasadena from the freeway. The only way he would agree to take us home was if Sharon would ride with him to Pasadena and drop me off first, even though her house was closer to the club than mine, and she agreed. I found out later he had an ulterior motive. This was before cell phones, and Sharon didn't have a home phone. I did not find out until the next time I saw her that this man had raped her after they had dropped me off. Unfortunately, she soon found out that she had gotten pregnant from the rape. But she didn't keep the baby. Needless to say, she was devastated. Things were never the same again after that. I lost touch with her and found out later, years later, that she was shot and killed while she was at a biker bar. I didn't know the Lord at this time in my life, but as I look back on the things we thought were fun and exciting, I see that sin never has a happy ending. The scripture says that there is pleasure in sin for a season, but I've come to realize it's only for a short season, and then the consequences kick in. Like I said, I didn't know the Lord back then, and the only thing I ever remember hearing about the Lord was a story about my grandmother. When my oldest sister was in the hospital, I was hearing that story when my oldest sister was in the hospital. Before I was born, my oldest sister was in the hospital and was about to lose her life. The doctors had told my mom, "We've done all we can do. It's in the Lord's hands now." Apparently, my grandmother was there at the hospital, and my mom told me that my grandmother went into the room where my sister was and asked God calmly, very calmly, if this was Joyce's time to go. You see, from what I understand, my grandmother was an extremely godly woman. Back then, they were called holiness believers. The lost people call them holy rollers. My mom said my grandmother walked out of Joyce's room and said, "She is not going to die. The Lord said it isn't her time to go." Somehow, hearing this story, I got the impression that my grandmother would have been just as calm had the Lord said, "Yes, it's her time to go, and I'm taking her home." I have come to understand that she trusted the Lord with all her heart. This incident was pretty much all I had ever heard about God. Little did I know it would not be long before I was calling on the Lord myself. For the next 5 years or so, I would be exposed to more and more of the ever-present drug culture, from walking into my large walk-in closet and barely finding a place to take off my shoes because my boyfriend had just received 100 pounds of marijuana that day while I was at work. Then having a man walk into my house and point a gun at us while my husband was measuring out cocaine into a 1-ounce bags on a scale big enough to fill up my dining room table. To watching my friends, mostly young girls, shooting heroin. My friend Becky was one of those girls. Becky and her husband and some of the other folks came over to my house when I was getting ready to go out one night. They wanted to know if it was okay if they do their drugs there before they went out partying. My husband and I said, sure. I had my hair up in rollers and was sitting on the couch, just waiting until they left so that I could finish getting dressed. The next thing I knew, Becky plopped down beside me, and under her breath, she said, man, that was good. Heroin was not my drug of choice, thank God. So I was clueless what she meant. In the next couple of minutes, I noticed she was unusually quiet. I looked over at her, and she was slumped over as if she had passed out. I called her, but she didn't respond. I shook her, and nothing. I yelled for her husband, Glenn, who came over and tried to get her up. It was useless. No one could get any response out of her. And by this time, Glenn and his brother had gotten on either side of her, put her arms around their necks, and taken her outside they thought maybe the cold weather might revive her, but it didn't. Nothing was working. I began to panic. Oh my God, she's going to die. She's going to die in my house. And then Glenn and his brother now attempted to shoot some milk into her veins. I don't know what that was supposed to do. All I know is that this had been going on for about 5 minutes, and I was afraid she was already dead. When the milk didn't do anything, they decided to undress her and put her in the bathtub with the shower hitting her in the face. I helped them disrobe her and get her in the shower. My emotions were a mix of fear and anger at this point. Nothing helped. Somehow, something deep inside of me started praying. In reality, I knew it was too late. She had been unresponsive for what seemed like an eternity, even though it had actually been about 7 or 8 minutes. We even placed a mirror under her nose, but there was no breath, none. In my head, I was praying a desperate prayer. Oh God, don't let her die. That's the end of chapter 3. I want to thank you for stopping by and listening. I'll be reading chapter 4 next Tuesday, God willing. And in the meantime, I invite you to visit my website, which is www.sheepspeaks.org. And there's a link to my YouTube channel there, and you can find the other 2 chapters that I've read out of my book. And you can also find over 100 videos on many types of spiritual warfare and spiritual subjects. And so I invite you to share my video and to subscribe to my YouTube channel and like and share my videos. It really helps my channel. I appreciate it. Thanks.